Who did Cain marry? Hey, Jordan here for Bible and Archaeology. We want to answer this frequently asked question. It's something that we've been asked. It's also something that if you Google, you can find a lot of answers. Not all of them are good. So we've got to acknowledge the problem itself. How is Cain marrying anybody? Genesis 4:17 says Cain knew his wife and she conceived and bore Enoch. But by Genesis 4:17, outside of the birth of Cain and Abel, Genesis has not recorded the births of anyone else. We also haven't been told that God created anyone else. So who is Cain marrying? Well, some of this is answered by knowing the way that Genesis records births. It largely skips over the births of daughters. So if we're taking Genesis as a narrative account here, what's happened is Cain and Abel were born. Yes, Genesis tells us that. But also Adam and Eve had a daughter or multiple daughters, either before Cain and Abel or after, that Genesis didn't record. And so that is where the wife for Cain is coming from, whether it's directly his sister or some want to hedge and say maybe it's a niece. Maybe Adam and Eve had some daughters and then Abel married a daughter and had a daughter. Either way, Cain is marrying a very close relative here. It's incest. A response you'll see to the classification of incest for this relationship in some answers is that it's unfair to call this incest in either the way that we think about it or in the way that other biblical texts like Leviticus and Deuteronomy think about it, because Genesis comes before those. Leviticus 18:9 and Deuteronomy 27:33 both forbid explicitly the relationship that we see if this is Cain and his sister. But they might argue those texts come after Genesis. And so the incest prohibitions we see in those can't be applied to the story of Cain and Abel. A problem with this is, what about their prohibitions of murder then? By the time we have the murder in Genesis 4, there has not been a prohibition of murder. So is Cain not in trouble? In that situation, the answer changes. Then, oh no, that part was around before. This is a way to try to deal with the discomfort that is Cain marrying his sister or maybe a niece. This is an answer that we see affirmed in other ancient traditions and interpretations. Jubilees gives us a name for Cain's sister who he marries, Awan. Genesis Rabbah tells us that it was his twin sister. Josephus doesn't elaborate and say specifically the relationship between Cain and his wife, but does say that she was cast out with him, removing the option that she was someone that he ran into after he'd been cast out, meaning it's a sister or maybe a niece. If you have questions about Bible texts, send them in, let us know. We're happy to answer any odd or frequent questions that you may have.